This is the tale of the Death Flute, the wind-blown voice for the ones who had left, and the man who carried that sound alone. If you close your eyes right now and breathe out slowly, feel that air leaving your chest like a fading echo. Imagine someone 2.5 million years ago doing the same, but through the hollow bone of a bird, not for music, not for joy, but for the dead. If you want to know what life truly felt like 2.5 million years ago, subscribe to the channel, because what you are about to hear was once played not for ears, but for souls. The morning after death was always the same. Grey light hanging in the sky like a lid too heavy to lift. Birds quiet, trees stiff. The ground cold even when the fire still burned. Bodies didn't stay warm long in those days, not even the strong. Once someone died, the group gathered slowly, not all at once, not with rush or panic, but like stones rolling into a circle, quiet and without words. No one told the children to hush. They just did. Own man always moved before the others, not because he led them, not because they followed him, but because that was his way now, his task, his burden. His sound walked ahead with nothing in his hands but a long thin bone, pale like ash, light as air, a bird's leg maybe, hollowed by time or by tooth. No carvings, no marks, just the kind of object most would step over. But not him. Wasn't a hunter, though he knew how to hold a spear. He wasn't a fire builder, though he sat close to the flames. He wasn't old, but he carried an old silence with him, and he didn't laugh like the others. The flute had chosen him, or maybe someone else had. No one remembered how it began, but he remembered long ago. When he was young and foolish, he had found that bone near a dry river, picked it up, held it to his mouth and blew, just to feel the wind move, and it made a strange soft sound. Not like music, not like anything else that others laughed, not cruelly, just like how people laugh when something unexpected happens. But one old woman had frowned, turned her head, and said something quiet. That's not a sound for joy. After that, the sound was remembered, and when the next death came, someone placed the bone in his hand and nodded, and he walked. Didn't ask why. He didn't say no. He just walked with it and blew the same soft sound into the wind, and the people followed. And the body was taken from that moment. His path was shaped not with stones, not with fire, but with breath. He began to call him the wind mouth, the death breath, the bone walker. Not as praise, not as insult, just names, simple ones. Ones that stuck. No one else ever played the bone, not even when he was sick, not even when he bled from the foot or couldn't eat for days. The flute waited for his breath, and no one else. People began to believe the sound did something, that it reached the dead, showed them the way into the far woods, the cold lands where none returned. It wasn't magic. It was more than that. It was memory made of air. When he blew the bone, the people cried easier. They wailed louder. They dropped to their knees without shame. It was like the sound gave them permission to feel, but for him, it was not a gift. It was a way that had to arrive before the others. He had to see the dead before the wrappings, before the ash, before the smoke and fire. He had to stand alone and breathe life into the bone while death still lingered in the air. He saw every face that left this world. He saw every twisted hand, every bite mark, every sunken eye. He saw how death took slow or fast, kind or cruel, quiet or loud, but he could not crit. It was the rule. No one spoke, but everyone knew. If his breath cracked, if the flute stuttered, if the sound turned sharp, the dead might lose their way, or worse, linger. So he became stone outside and storm inside, never weeping, never shaking, holding it all behind his ribs like a flood behind rock. Children grew afraid of him. They said he carried ghosts in his lungs. They said the bone was cursed. Women touched his shoulders for luck, then stepped away. Men gave him meat, but never sat classy or slept near the edge of the camp, always near the flute. Like a fire no one else tended, warm for no one but him. Once tried not to play, once only when a close friend died. Someone who once gave him berries, once taught him how to find clean water. He sat with the bone in hand and shook his head, but the people waited, eyes wide, full of fear. And the old woman's words came back again, not for joy so he blew. And it hurt more than anything he ever knew, like tearing out a part of himself and sending it away sometimes when no one watched. He went deep into a cave and played there, alone, the sound bouncing from rock to rock, echoing until it faded. He liked that echo. It was the only time the sound came back to him in that cave. He let his shoulders drop. He let his eyes close. He let his heart beat wild and open. He let the sound fill the dark and sit with him like a shadow that understood. He had no name anymore, not the one he was born with, not the one his mother called him with soft hands. He was just the one who plays for the dead, and yet he never refused, never once said no, because somewhere deep in him he believed, or maybe hoped, that when his time came, someone would hold the flute to and send the sound out for him. The sky that day was strange, not grey like usual, not heavy like morning skies tend to be, but clear and wide and still, like it didn't know what had happened yet, like it hadn't decided how to feel, but the people had decided they had felt. Everything at once, like water dumped over fire, like bark cracking in heat. The crying came fast. No slow gathering, no quiet circle, just voices rising all together like wolves in pain. A child had deed, not a hunter, not a fire watcher, not a mother or elder, but a child, still small enough to be carried, still light enough to be held with one arm. A child whose laugh had been part of the camp's sound, who had never known winter. Aleneno one moved. Not even the strong ones, not even the men who had seen war with beasts, not even the women who had buried their own brothers before, but the man with the flute moved. He did not wait to be handed the bone. It was already in his hands, already warm from being held too tight, already damp where his fingers clutched. I did not wait for the body to be wrapped or lifted. He stepped into the center of the people. Like a branch cracking into fire, raised the flute to his lips, and played. Sound came slower than ever before, like it didn't want to leave, like it knew what it was meant for and feared it. It stretched over the people like smoke, like a blanket made of nothing but breath, and the people fell to their knees without being told. Fire didn't move, the leaves didn't stir, and even the wind waited. Something was different and felt it too. The moment the sound left him, it didn't go into the trees like before. It didn't travel toward the hills or the caves. It stayed above them, hanging like mist over still water. It didn't echo. It didn't fade. I just stayed, has stopped playing, and looked up. His face calm, but inside something had cracked, something old, something that had stayed strong for years now. Bent that night he left the camp without a torch, without his fur wrap, without food, just the flute in his hand, cold against his skin. Walked to the far edge of the forest, past the places where people gathered wood, past the traps, past the trail stones, into the part of the world that belonged only to animals, and weather. Sat on a flat rock and looked into the trees. We only him, he thought. Why always him? We must his breath carry sorrow. Why must his lips touch bone? When hearts break, we did no one else learn. Why did they let him grow grey with it? We did his own grief get no sound. Raised the flute and tried to play again, but nothing came. No wind, no breath. Like his body refused to. Sat there until the sky lightened and a cold bit deep bit in that silence. He heard the old woman's voice again, the one who long ago had told him the sound was not for joy. She had also said something else, something he forgot until now. Sound leaves, but it carries memory with it. Memory must have a keeper, or the dead are lost. Twice he closed his eyes, and for the first time in many seasons he made a choice, not out of duty, but out of will. He would not carry it alone anymore. When he returned, the people were quiet. They looked at him like he had gone somewhere beyond even the edge of the world. He asked for a boy, not the strongest, not the loudest, just a boy who listened more than he spoke, who watched the fire with the eyes of someone who saw more than Flamesh, gave the boy a shorter bone, smoother, newer, not yet filled with grief, and showed him how to hold it gently like cradling an injured bird, and told him not to blow hard, not to force the wind, but to let it move like breath on a sleeping child's cheek. The boy listened, and tried and failed and tried again, and one day the sound came, not sharp, not perfect, but soft, and it drifted not like sorrow, but like sleep. People noticed it when the next death came. The boy played, and it was not cold, it was not haunting, it was warm like a blanket over pain, like a hand held in the dark. The old man did not stop playing, but he played less. He stood beside the boy instead of before him of a time. The flute changered, holes were carved into it, lines scratched in with stones, stories added. The sound shifted, became layered, became charadite, no longer belonged to one breath, but too many. The boy taught another, and the flute became something that traveled through hands, not just from grave to grave, but from fire to fire, from celebration to sorrow, and back again. But when the old man felt his legs weaken, when his chest ached even while resting, when he knew his time was near, he did not fear, asked the boy, now grown, to play for him. While he was still a liver, he lay near the fire, wrapped in fur, bones tired but heart calm, and the boy raised the flute and played. The sound was full and deep and soft, and the old man Smilada said nothing, just closed his eyes and let the wind carry him before his body did. And now when someone dies, the flute is played, not always the same flute, but always the same feeling. Sometimes it's buried with the dead, sometimes left at the edge of a cave, sometimes hung in a tree where wind still moves through it, but the sound is never lost. It still moves, still finds the spaces where grief waits, still touches the hearts that cannot speak. Death Flute lives on it because of what it sounds like, but because someone once dared to carry it alone and then chose not to anymore. And when the sound faded into the wet wind and the bones lay quiet under the trees, no one moved, no one spoke. They just watched the boy lower the flute, as if a part of the world had been spoken to and only it could understand.